Today, I'm really excited about our next mentor, which is Shana Sissel. She is someone in the finance industry that she's been a force to be reckoned with because her growth from the finance industry has been amazing. For over 2 decades, she's climbed the ladder of the financial services industries. She's the founder, president, and chief executive officer of Banrion Capital Management, and she helps independent advisors navigate the complex world of alternative investing.
People who have the greatest success in life have that moment where they got a taste and it all gets taken away and they have to rebuild everything from the bottom up. Those people end up being the most successful because they know what they had and they begin to value it, right? Private investments is so vast of a universe and you can do so much there. The key to success investing is sticking with an investment, and not panicking, and you're much more likely to stick with an investment if you connect with it.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the More We Know podcast. My name is Mir, your host. The More We Know podcast is the world's mentorship platform where we bring you on experts every single month to provide you real-life mentorship in your pocket. We bring on people like the former founder of Reebok, the former CEO of Chipotle. We bring on the founder of Anytime Fitness. We've brought on a multitude of different guests in this industry, and we want to provide you real-life mentorship in your pocket wherever you are, whether you're on the way to school, whether you're on the way to practice, whether you're on your way to your job. Everyone needs access to a mentor, and unfortunately, not everyone gets access to a mentor. So today, I'm really excited about our next mentor, which is Shana Sissel. She is someone in the finance industry that if you've been on TD and CNBC and all these different news outlets, she's been a force to be reckoned with because her growth from the finance industry has been amazing. For over 2 decades, she's climbed the ladder of the financial services industries. She's the founder, president, and chief executive officer of Banrion Capital Management, and she helps independent advisors navigate the complex world of alternative investing, assisting with investment platform development, alt portfolio construction, and developing the best practice in alternative investment due diligence. She's a sought-out speaker, so we're grateful that she's here today. She's appeared frequently on CNBC, Fox News, Bloomberg, TD Ameritrade Network, and she has maintained a fierce, outspoken advocacy for her fellow women in finance. As you guys know, finance is an industry traditionally dominated by men, and so Shana is breaking the walls, showing that this is an industry that should be a fair industry, should have women in it, and it's amazing to see what she's doing. And she's also had her fair share of adversity, going through things like the 9/11 attack, and there's some things we're going to talk about here today. But just a well-rounded mentor for today that goes to show you the importance of breaking into an industry where traditionally barriers are against you, fighting through adversity, and continuing to win. But she's going to tell her story better than I ever could. So, Shana, thanks so much for being on today.
Thank you for having me. I feel like, when you start talking about like CEO and founder of Anytime Fitness and Chipotle, I'm like, well, I don't know if I belong in that category, but pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, it's so fruitful to have you as part of this discussion, to look from those guests to now, because you're someone that, something consistently I found amongst all those guests, even Monty, who was the former CEO of Chipotle, where he had no idea what he was doing growing up. Like, he was working at Dairy Queen, there was nothing. And I'm curious to see, because you broke into finance, but walk us back a little bit to your childhood growing up, sure. Like what your parents did.
Sure. So finance definitely was not where I would have ever predicted I'd end up. I actually failed algebra twice. My algebra teacher definitely gets a kick out of the fact of the industry I ended up with. I come from a family of immigrants. So my mom is originally from Ireland. She came to this country when she was about 10. And my dad's parents were from Poland. So, both sides of my family have immigrant roots. I grew up in a multilingual household. My grandparents spoke Russian, Polish. I think my grandfather spoke Lithuanian, French, and English. My grandmother spoke German, Russian, and Polish. And so they would talk and swear and argue in Russian, and they would talk to us in Polish. And so I spoke Polish growing up. They passed away when I was in high school, so that's a use it or lose it kind of language. But I can still recognize Polish, and I can still have some conversation in Polish. A lot of hardship in terms of that. When your family comes over from a different country for a better life, it's usually kind of 2 steps backwards to help their kids and future generations succeed. So there was a lot of that in my family. My grandfather worked at U.S. Steel, my dad's dad. My dad's mom worked in a roller skating factory. And my mom's parents both worked in service industry. So my grandmother, her mother was a maid, and my grandfather was like a concierge kind of doorman at hotels. And then my dad's a police officer, retired. He's 37 years. He worked for the city of Worcester, Massachusetts. And my mom is an inner city school, or was an inner city school teacher. I always say is, because that's how I see them, but they're both retired. So she taught in the inner city schools. She taught second grade, fourth grade, and then the last 20 years she taught sixth grade. And it's really the blue collar roots. Like, there was no real ambition to do anything beyond civil service in the family. In fact, my dad wanted us all to take jobs that had unions and pensions. That was all he cared about. The goal I think they had for me was to become a teacher. My sister is a 911 dispatcher. My brother was in the military. Now he works in sales for Renewal by Anderson. And my other sister, worked as a receptionist, and her husband works for the electric company. So that's my background. And I kind of fell into finance by accident. My dad's oldest brother, there's a massive age difference, the joys of the Great Depression. So my grandparents were old grandparents. When I was born, they were in their 70s. My grandmother had my dad when she was 40. So he has an older brother who's like 93. My dad's 78. So there's 15 years age difference there. So I didn't really know him, but I knew of him. He was sort of like a family legend. He went to Brown. He was a football star, went to Brown on scholarship, and ended up working for an oil company, and eventually owned his own oil company, Meehan Oil, which is a Long Island-based home heating oil company, which during the 80s, during like the LBO craze, he LBO'd that company with 3 guys that he worked with at Hess. And he spent most of his life traveling all over the country, taking jobs, as he was moving up the corporate ladder. So, he started working in Massachusetts, and then Rhode Island, and then Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then Pasadena, and then Texas, and then eventually ended up in New York, which is where all my cousins live now. But he was very successful. And even though I had very little exposure to him growing up, and most of the family I was exposed to was that blue collar side, I always aspired to be more like him. And I would take to heart things my dad would say or my mom would say, like, oh, your Uncle Stan did this. Your Uncle Stan hung out with the right kids, or he did this, or he played that so that he could meet the right people. And in a way, I think they didn't say it in the most favorable way. I don't think they were insulting, but I think they kind of looked at it as like he was very, very deliberate in the actions he did growing up so that he could be successful. And I took that as kind of my roadmap, and there were definitely setbacks over time. I didn't always hang out with the best kids, but I always was conscious of the fact that being deliberate with what I did, who I hung out with, and what I exposed myself to. And that particularly came true in high school when I was not hanging out with the best crowd, and my dad wanted me to become more refined, so he sent me to like finishing school. And I ended up getting into pageants, which, one of the girls I competed with in pageantry is Maria Menounos, who's a really famous person. She, hosts of Access Hollywood on NBC. She has her own show now. I competed with her. I was friends with her. And so I started being exposed to people who had much greater ambition. And that made me want to have more ambition, to not stay in Worcester my whole life and to just be more than that. I still didn't have a ton of direction, and I ended up in finance by accident. But once I did end up in the financial service industry, I knew I had found my place and kind of went from there. I originally thought I was going to be a sideline reporter for ESPN. My undergraduate degree is in sport management. I got the job in finance because I was working for a staffing agency, and they were looking to fill jobs in finance for Morgan Stanley. And I went in undercover on an interview because we were having trouble getting people hired. And then I ended up being hired, and they just paid me a lot more. But once I was there, I knew I had kind of found my place.
You mentioned this idea of finding your place, like this finance was that, a lot of Gen Zs and people my age struggle with that idea of finding their place. Like how do you know that you found your place when you get somewhere? Like, what do you look for?
I just think you have a passion for what you're doing and you enjoy what you're doing and it doesn't feel like work anymore. But like the emphasis here is I had no idea what I was doing until I accidentally fell into it and I was 22. You know, it's not like I had any clue what I wanted to do growing up. And even then, once I got into the industry, I knew I had found some passion for like building portfolios, investing, following stocks, but I didn't love that particular job. But finding that passion was what I needed to kind of get some direction in where I wanted to go. And then today I work in the alternative space in the hedge fund world doing the media, but that wasn't intentional. Like I wasn't like, oh, I want to be on TV. I want to work in hedge funds. As I was moving through my career, opportunities would come about and I would jump at those opportunities and they would either feel right or not. And in the case of moving into the hedge fund world, it just felt right at the time. But that was in 2007. So, you know, I was well into my late 20s at that point. Prior to that, I was in finance. I knew I loved finance, but I still was trying to find, you know, where felt like home, where I wanted to do the work no matter the time of day, where I, you know, even now, I enjoy reading finance materials, research, watching finance-related stuff for fun on like a Saturday afternoon. So like when you get to the point where it doesn't feel like work anymore, then you've probably found what you want to do, the place you want to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like, you know, from the outside looking in, if we look at sort of you on the media and your social media and the business that you run today, and the people that you employ for that business, it almost looks like it's the perfect situation. But the one thing I want to emphasize to the audience, you mentioned this dichotomy between your early 20s and late 20s. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of us, you know, 24, 25, 26. I actually think that age is even more interesting than 20, 21, and 30 because now you're transitioning to your second half of your 20s mm-hmm. where you're closer to 30 than you are to 20.
Yeah.
And you're effectively becoming an adult. But there's so many, and I see it in my Instagram DMs and my emails of people that are 25, 26, thinking, what did I just do the last 5 years? I graduated college. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm freaking out. I don't have savings. You know, is there any sort of comfort or advice on that part that you could give to that when you were 25? Like, did you have it figured out?
Oh, no. I had like a nervous breakdown when I was 25 for that exact reason. I was like, what am I doing? I think we go into life thinking at 25 that we will be established in our career, making good money, you know, be in a relationship, maybe be married, maybe be on our way to, I think that's just come to be an expectation of where we think we should be when we're 25 and no one actually is. And then you start to panic like, oh my God, I'm behind. I got married at 32. I was divorced at 40. You know, I had my son at 37. And I didn't get my first C-suite job until 2019. So, really? You know, life comes at you fast and you can plan and save and you could think you have the most perfect life, but then again, life comes at you fast. I mean, when I was 35, I was married. I had a house, a beautiful house that I built, that I loved. I had $100,000 in savings. I was living the dream in my thought. I had the job that I had dreamed about at Fidelity and I was really happy. And then, you know, by 40, I was divorced, broke, no house, no equity, single mom. And that's not supposed to happen, right? Look at me, I'm on TV, I run my own business. What do you mean you have no savings? What do you mean? You know, but some things are out of your control. Divorces, bad relationships, bad marriages, you know, they can really do damage to you no matter how hard you try to make it so that's not the case. And so you got to rebuild. And, you know, life is a constant state of rebuilding and reassessing where you're at and where you want to be. So, you know, at 25, most people are nowhere near where they're going to be and probably haven't even figured it out yet. When I was 25, I was still working on the sales desk at Fidelity. I hadn't moved into an analytical role. I had still no exposure to hedge funds. I had never been on TV. So my life and my career was far, far from clear on the direction I was going.
That is extremely powerful to share, and it's kind of makes me emotional to think about, because I feel like Instagram is become like a good thing and a bad thing in the sense that it's like, on one side, the access you have. I mean, we connected on Instagram, like the network of how fast you can meet people is superb. Business, I'm sure you see it, but the negative aspect is typically you see the makeup, so you see like what is so pretty on the outside, but you don't see what's going on behind the scenes, which is, well, thankful for you sharing sort of that background story. Now, because you said at 40 you went through all this, going broke and going and divorce, and that's stuff that needs to be talked about more than people talking about, oh, I sold my business for 100 million, or my RIA just hit SEC registration 100 million. It's doing amazing. It's awesome. But what does someone do when they feel like they have it all and then they lose it? Like, what steps can you take to come out of that?
Well, you got to be resilient, right? You can't let that define you. I definitely went through a dark period, I would say, in the last 5 years, where, if you had told me that I was going to be turning 45, because I'll be 45 next month.
No way.
Yeah.
Did not seem like that.
Well, thanks. And I was going to be turning 45, and that would be a single mom, rebuilding my savings, starting a business from scratch. No home, like I don't own my own house. I wouldn't have believed you, especially given that, 10 years ago, I had everything. I had all of those things. And so it's crazy, but I know what I had a taste of it, and I want it back. And I understand that there's rebuilding involved. So you got to kind of pick yourself up and move forward. And if you look at the most successful people in life, like, Steve Jobs, like, he's a perfect example, right? So like, he was extremely successful young, started Apple fairly young. Apple blew up. He had great success, and then he got fired, and then he had nothing. He got divorced. He had a estranged relationship with his daughter. He was kind of the laughing stock. But then he didn't give up. Now, granted, he had a lot more resources than I did when I kind of had bad things happen. But the point is that these things happen even to the most successful people. In fact, I would argue that the people who have the greatest success in life have that moment where they got a taste and it all gets taken away and they have to rebuild everything from the bottom up. Those people end up being the most successful because they know what they had and they begin to value it, right? So, and they also have this fear of it losing it again, right? That healthy fear of everything can be taken from you in a second. So you also tend to enjoy when you rebuild and not take for granted. And I would say that very much, even though starting my own business has been the greatest and most terrifying thing I've ever done. This week, for example, I've not been able to sleep because I've been focusing on, like, we haven't been raising capital at the clip that I thought we would at this point because SVB and, just the venture world right now. And then I get good news yesterday. So I went from like 4 days of not being able to sleep, stressing out, like, am I going to be homeless? Am I going to be able to keep my employees? Am I going to be able to do this? To like complete, just all that anxiety going away in like a moment. So it's just crazy how that happens, and you just kind of have to have faith. But because I've lost everything, it makes me appreciate every single thing that I do from this point on, which I think is going to make me more successful. And I think if you look at, the people who are the most successful in life, they've all lost everything and had to rebuild at some point in time. And that I think is really powerful.
That is extremely powerful. How do you cope with anxiety?
It's funny because I had somebody recently tell me that I should not admit I have anxiety, like, on social. You just do. Like, in my case, I meditate. The Breathe app is something I spend a lot of time on. And then I also don't try to, like, suppress it. I think that's the biggest problem people have, is like trying to be stoic and trying to have a certain image and not admitting their own weaknesses. Mm-hmm. That is actually the worst thing you can do. I think we've grown up in a society in recent years where we talk about, like, well, you got to stay positive. Don't let that stress get over you. You got to manage things. And I actually think the worst thing you can do when you're feeling anxious or stressed is like not admit that you're feeling anxious and stressed and like have that moment of like, okay, I feel this way. I'm going to feel this way. I'm going to let myself feel this way and have a day or an hour and just let me be in my feelings, right? And then release. I think the worst thing you can do is try to suppress it because you never actually like go through it and let it, and then you can pass through it. It's as if you're at a stop sign and you just don't want to go through it, right? So you stop, you take the moment to feel what you feel, and then you move forward. And that's how I have chosen to kind of go through my life. But I would say most of the people that know me know that when I'm in that state, like it's a day and I'm a mess and then I'm done. And I'm okay with that, you know? And I think that people should be okay with that too. And I also think that there's something to be said about being open and honest on social to a point. You know, obviously you want to be positive and be inspiring, but you also want to admit that you're not perfect and provide some level of vulnerability. Some people may judge you for that, but I think that the authenticity matters. You know, I try to be authentically who I am and always trying to improve as a person, but you're always going to be judged. And if you worry about what you're going to be judged for, then you're going to be in a constant state of not being who you are and comfortable with who you are and authentically who you are. More people will relate to your authenticity than you're attempting to, you know, be everything to all people.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, and due to that authenticity, you sometimes run into imposter syndrome and all these other things that we go through and high level people go through. But I think in this industry, finance specifically, if you look at all the disclosures over the last decades, you look at people like Bernie Madoff, and you even look at, you know, Sam Bankman, all these people, the fakeness and the fraud that happens behind the scenes, I think it's ever more important to be able to be authentic and show people. And, you know, that's why I'm seeing the push to social from everyone. I see the CEO of Riskalyze, I see Josh Brown, everyone is doing so much more social in the finance space. And I think that authenticity wins over time, which I just met you today, and in the conversation in our first half an hour, I see it powerfully. So thank you for being so transparent. Now, I do want to talk about your business because I know that's something that you're very passionate about. You're building it. I think I met your, I think it might be your CIO at one of the summit events recently. But before going into that, just to kind of close this on adversity, I'm really curious. We won't spend much time on it, but I know that in your background, you said that you survived a terror attack, which was 9/11. Can you talk about what happened there?
So I'll kind of go backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm the daughter of a cop, and I'm a daughter of, my dad was he was a corpsman in Vietnam. And so he was constantly being exposed to, you know, pretty awful things. And so he's the kind of guy, he's the kind of cop that even when he's not on duty, if he sees something or somebody needs help, he would be the first person to jump in. So if there was a car accident and the police hadn't gotten there yet, my dad would be the first one to pull over, car flipped over, trying to get people out, trying to provide CPR. You know, he once was working a pay job at a retail store got robbed. The owner of that store got shot. He was the first one there and dealing with the scene. When I was like 8 years old, we were at a festival and an older gentleman who was like dancing or something in front of me. He was probably in his 60s, had a heart attack. And my dad was the first person to provide CPR. And unfortunately, the gentleman died. But he died like in front of me when I was 7. So I've seen a lot of bad things, even before 9/11. And then obviously I was in Tower 2 on 9/11. I was working for Morgan Stanley. We were doing some training, and we were on the 65th floor, Tower 2. I didn't have a great grasp of what was happening until kind of afterwards. That's a lot to kind of deal with. And then also I was 2 blocks from the Boston Marathon bombing and was living in the city at that time, dealing with like the lockdowns. My sister's a 911 dispatcher. Her husband is the head of SWAT, and my cousin Michael runs SWAT for the city of Hartford. So they were all at Watertown. And so I've been exposed to a lot of that kind of stuff over my life, which I think has helped me just be able to be resilient in anything I face. I mean, my brother had issues growing up that I won't get into for his own privacy. But he had issues growing up, and we had to deal with a lot of the stuff that he was doing, and not sure if he would make it to his 30th birthday. I know he turned 40 2 years ago, and he was like, can't believe I made it to 40. I really didn't think I'd make it to 30. And so there was constantly adversity from that standpoint, family members with mental health issues, drug issues. So seeing that so much growing up, and then dealing with 2 terrorist attacks, I just think that it gives you like a sense of, if you can overcome those things, you can overcome anything, even in those darkest moments. And I would say from those experiences, I have learned how to deal with my own anxiety, your own PTSD. I still have moments, but it just makes me feel like there's not anything that I can't overcome.
And those situations are what define you, right?
Exactly. But if there's anything anybody can take from this, is like, no matter what you've been through in your life, no matter what hardship you've been through, like, if you are determined to be successful and to succeed and to achieve what you want to achieve, you can do that. The worst thing you can do, and this is where I see most people get stunted in their lives and what they want to achieve, is when you let those things define you and you then blame those experiences for whatever struggles you go through in the future. So, my dad, like, I'm going to give an example, not really relevant to my family, but like, if your parents got divorced, right? And your dad left and you didn't have a dad in your life. Like, well, I'm this way because I didn't have a dad. Or, I'm this way because my mother died young. Like, whatever it is, or because I had this bad thing happen. If you constantly live in a state of that being who you are and letting that define you, then you're stuck. You can't move forward, and you're just stuck in a trauma situation, and you're never going to be able to take responsibility for your actions and what you want to achieve and what you want to do and get to where you want to be if you're constantly stuck blaming something else or a situation you were put in on why you aren't where you want to be. You may never get to where you want to be. Like, my dream was to be a billionaire and have a big house on the beach and have a horse and retire young. That ain't gonna happen. Married and happy, and those things aren't in my life. I can't dwell. So what's my new goal? And set goals higher than you think you can achieve, right? Like, really set big goals for yourself. You may not achieve that big, huge goal, but just being directed towards something that seems so big will get you really close to it. And I think that that's what people need to focus on. I think focusing on who you are, what you want to do, and not letting anything else get you stuck is the key to success.
Yeah, I think that actually makes me think of something I saw Elon Musk tweet recently, which was, he said, to achieve this full level of happiness, if you're happy in work and you're happy with spouse, family, you're at equal, he said that's equal to full happiness. But if you have happiness in work but no happiness with your spouse, he called it half happiness. On that topic, I'm just curious, what you're speaking about there. Do you think the equilibrium of happiness, is it those two things, or do you think happiness is just sort of like this internal thing for you?
I think it's somewhat internal. I think there's something to what he's saying in terms of this, but I wouldn't use the word spouse, because I don't think you should ever let another person define your happiness. But I do think that something that gets said a lot, and I can't stress this enough, is like, who you choose to marry is the most important decision you'll ever make in your life. Because if you choose the wrong person, it can be a massive setback for you. So making that decision and the right decision and really getting to know them and making sure you're all on the same page, I think, is super important. And if you pick the right person, you will go much further than you ever thought possible. But I think happiness is within yourself, and you can never rely on somebody else for your happiness. So you have to choose to be happy every day. You have to get up and choose to not let the bad things define you and go into the day with optimism and happiness. And if you end up having a good day, great. And if you end up having a bad day, it's that day, and you don't let it go to the next day. But I think happiness is defined by yourself, who you are inside, and being content with that. And if you don't feel happiness because you're not comfortable with who you are or what you're achieving, then you need to self-reflect on that, right? Like, why aren't you happy? Is it because you aren't where you thought you would be? Why aren't you where you thought you would be? How do you fix that? These are the things you have to take responsibility for things. But I don't love the idea of happiness with your spouse and happiness at work. I think it's happiness with your personal life and happiness with your professional life, whatever that may be. Obviously I'm not married anymore. I don't have a spouse, but I am quite happy with my life. I have a great son. I have a great team with my business. I enjoy getting up every day. I feel fulfilled, and I don't have a husband. Hopefully someday maybe I will again, but I don't think you should define yourself by having somebody else make you happy. It's are you happy in your personal life, however that may be? Are you happy in your professional life, however that may be? And if you do have a spouse or a partner, make sure it's the right person, because having the wrong one is going to make your life not fit into those two buckets.
That is like so powerful. It's interesting. I think like with your background, we're going to come in right away and hit it hard with finance, but I think the audience needed to hear a lot of these gems that you just gave, because there's more people than they care to admit struggle with the stuff that you're just mentioning here. Mm-hmm. And most people won't admit to it. And I think I learned that early on, that when you focus on happiness in an external factor, mm-hmm. you'll never actually achieve it, because once I get X salary, I'll be happier, or once I get X,
never happens.
It will never, because there'll be the new chase.
Not only that, but the average person will live to their means, mm-hmm. right? You start making more money. Have you ever met a person, honestly, that starts making more money that doesn't upgrade their lifestyle every time? No, right? It doesn't happen. So it's not even about that. I actually think the key to happiness and success is to always have a goal. Mm. Always have a goal. And that goal doesn't have to be like an achievement. It can be just a sense of yourself, mm-hmm. right? Comfort with yourself. My goal is to get to X age and be comfortable with who I am as a person and what I've done with my life. People say no regrets. I actually think you'll make mistakes in life, but a lot of times those mistakes are important. So it is no regrets. So are you living your life authentically, not regretting the things you did or didn't do? And if you're not, maybe that's what you need to work on to get to that level of happiness, or that sense of achievement, or maybe that's your goal, right? Is to self-improvement. Maybe it's to I'm one of those people who's I need to have a goal to get in shape, and it could be lame, like I'm going on vacation, mm-hmm. but it needs to have something to work towards. I think everybody kind of needs, it's like the carrot, right? The carrot to keep you going. And it can be your kid. I want to be a good role model for my kid. Forget what the past is going forward. That's the key. And happiness is not always defined by an achievement, but it can be defined by some goal that you have to make yourself a better person. Constant self-reflection, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and constant that you need that in your business too. Every mm-hmm. day you need to do audits on your business, just like you do your life. So thank you for sharing that. I think that was just very, not only emotional and heartfelt, but something that I think the audience can really take away from, especially this age group that I needed to hit home. I appreciate you being vulnerable, because the 25 to 27 age range is such a weird place to be. It's
weird. Like I said, I had a complete breakdown at 25.
Yeah.
This is not where I expected to be. And now I'm about to turn 45, and I'm having kind of that other moment. I'm having that moment again. And I think it's okay.
Yeah.
It's that moment to self-reflect on your life, where you thought you would be, where you want to go, and realize it's okay if you're not exactly where you thought you would be at this threshold.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it's one day can change it. You had a tough week with capital raising. Friday hit, and you had some good news. So
right.
It switches quickly. So speaking of that, so tell the audience, what is Banrion Capital Management?
So I started Banrion in September.
Okay.
Sort of out of desperation. Again, another example of lemons. Making lemonade out of lemons. I had been laid off a bunch of times in about 18-month period. I wasn't finding the right fit for what I wanted to do. I was not feeling fulfilled in the jobs that I was being offered. And it was coming down to like, oh, they're just paying me the most, but not enjoying the job and not culturally fitting in, or having to give up something I enjoyed, like the media or the speaking, in order to like do the job. And so I started Banrion because I needed something to generate income, single mom. I support my son financially. And so I launched it and didn't know what I was doing. Like I didn't even really have direction for what I wanted it to be. I just knew I loved working in the alternative space. I had a lot of respect in the industry. In that area, I had worked with a lot of financial advisors. And so I really was in a good place in terms of network and reputation to kind of do something there. How and where it would go, I wasn't quite sure. But over, I would say, from September to December, the business plan became much more clear, like where the hole was in the market and how I could really make a difference. You know, in the alternative investment space for advisors, it's a little saturated right now. Every other day, there's a new platform coming out that's offering to democratize alternative investments for advisors and, you know, make everything easier. But ultimately, financial advice is a relationship business, and technology doesn't solve that problem. And so, in my eyes, having worked with advisors for a decade, having been in the alternative investment world for 15 plus years, what has been missing is that relationship focus, that service focus, and that handholding to gain comfort. So I launched Banrion, and now the real focus here is to help advisors allocate and scale to alternative investments across, you know, what is accessible to everybody, like mutual funds, ETFs, and interval funds, to also what works in the private markets too, like private equity, private credit, private, real assets, things of that nature. Bridging that gap to help advisors understand it, but then also understanding that what the Harvard endowment is going to invest in isn't necessarily going to connect with, you know, an individual investor who's investing for his family or for himself or herself. And perhaps we should refine our approach to what they might want to invest in, because private investments is so vast of a universe and you can do so much there. We don't, like private equity, yes, that's compelling and institutions love that. We can get similar returns doing something that you're more passionate about, right? Because as an investor, the number one thing, the key to success investing is sticking with an investment, you know, and not panicking. And you're much more likely to stick with an investment if you connect with it. So we spend a lot of time in that space building an access platform where the strategies that we include fit either an impact or I like to call it a vanity play. Something that people will connect with on an emotional level and make them feel good about that investment. So that's what we're doing. We're working with advisors, helping them scale using turnkey solutions that kind of allow them to allocate in a meaningful way for all their clients, but also finding ways that they can build their relationships with their clients and help people invest in a way that they feel like they're doing something that makes them happy. You know, does it really make you happy to buy the S&P 500? But if I told you that you could invest in a sports rights fund and own a minority interest in your favorite professional sports team, that would make you happy. You'd connect with that. Maybe you're a wine aficionado and, you know, you can invest in a wine fund and get a case of the best vintage that year for the holidays. You know, that might bring you some joy. You know, investing can be joyful. And so that's what we're really focused on. And then anecdotally out of that, you know, we're female founded. Banrion means queen in Gaelic. My mom's Irish, from Ireland, Gaelic. It just kind of made sense. And we are an all-female team. And one of the pushbacks I got is that my team's appearance would be a detriment to us. Wow. And I've heard that mostly from women, believe it or not, that like, no one's going to take you seriously because of what you look like and what your team looks like. And I happen to have an attractive team. That actually makes me angry, because to the point you brought up earlier, how are we going to get women in this industry if we're telling them that they can't enjoy being a woman, and they have to play down their appearance in some way because it's not socially acceptable? Like, if somebody doesn't want to do business with me because of what I or my team looks like, well, then I don't want to do business with them either. And, Manish Kata, who owns a firm called Potomac Funds, he has unabashedly kind of taken this idea that I don't need to be anybody but who I authentically am to be successful in this industry. And I remember when I first met him, I thought he was super brash and, dropped F-bombs a little too much and mocked the industry a little too much. And I have told him I really didn't think he was going to be successful. I'm like, you can't do that and be successful. And he was like, well, I'd rather do it my way, authentically myself, than conform, because it might make somebody uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And he's now $1 billion in assets under management. And when I met him, he was 100 million. And I said that to him.
How long ago was the?
2020.
And how fast was the growth?
Well, he went from 100 million to $1 billion in 3 years.
Wow.
And he actually leaned into it more. And that's actually what's made him successful. So in a way, what I'm building at Banrion is kind of taking by his example. I love what he did. And I actually loved him for who he was. I just wasn't sure the industry was ready for somebody who was like that. But he proved me wrong, and only set to inspire me to do the same in my own way. Mm-hmm. And my own way is, I was a model. I competed in pageants. A lot of my circle of friends and connections happen to be in that world. A lot of them are in finance. And so I pulled from that when I was building my firm, and I was looking for people to add, and I wanted to have people who were like-minded, who I knew could be teammates and partners in our success, that I knew would stand by me. And so I happened to pull from that world, and if I'm judged for it, so be it. But the one thing I'm not going to do is conform to make the industry comfortable. And seeing someone like Manish succeed the way he has with that attitude has only inspired me to do the same. And that's how you change things. That's how you drive change in an industry. And I'm excited about what we're doing. And I'm excited that people are embracing what we're doing and seeing the value of what we bring to the table. We are different. Our business is very differentiated in terms of what we're trying to do. And I think that is ultimately going to be why we succeed, is because we are authentic who we are and want to make sure that our success is not as a result of us compromising who we are.
And so how would it work if an advisor, RIA, wants to work with you? What would they do?
So we work with both advisors, RIAs, and asset managers. Our focus with the asset manager side is to help them better service and support RIAs. So fundamentally, our mission is to provide a better way for RIAs to work in the alternative investment world. And so everything we do is with that in mind. So when we work with asset managers, we're working with them to improve how they market and position their products, how they support and service advisors. And we don't want to part with someone that doesn't want to work with advisors, doesn't want to make themselves available for advisors, and isn't going to provide service and support to advisors in the manner that we think advisors deserve to be supported. And then if an advisor wants to work with us, they can feel really confident in the fact that they're going to get a high level of service from us, and that they're going to have a dedicated investment officer who services just them and their business, and is going to work with them not only to help them, invest in alternatives, but also to build and grow the relationships they have with their existing clients by offering ideas on proactive ways that you can get your clients investing in more interesting things in the private markets. Also, opportunity to just grow and build the relationship and the understanding of the client. Because if you do that, the likelihood of retention is much higher, right? Because you've developed this bond with the client above and beyond just managing their financial plan or their investments. So if an advisor works with us, they can feel really confident that, we're going to help them with the alternative investments. We're going to help them have better, we hope, better risk-adjusted returns. But ultimately, our goal is to use alternative investments as a way to help grow and build their relationships with clients and prospects, to bring in new business and to bring in more assets.
Got it. That makes sense. And so the private investing, so a lot of Gen Zs might know what the S&P 500 is. They might know what broader markets are, equities, Apple, Tesla, whatever. But, these concepts, private credit, private equity, real estate, fractional, all these different things. I mean, what is alternative investments for people that have no idea what that means?
It's everything that's not traditional investments. Like, there's no good answer to that question. The universe of alternative investments is more vast than traditional. So if it is stocks and bonds and you can buy it in public markets, it's not alternative. If it is stocks and bonds and you're long short, and you're using derivatives and things of that nature, then it becomes alternative. If you're doing private equity, private credit, if you're investing in physical real estate, not REITs, that is alternative. If you are doing music rights, if you are doing any sort of venture capital, if you are investing in wine, if you are investing in sports teams, if you are investing in baseball cards, there's funds for that. You can invest in a whole lot of stuff. Anything that is not buying stocks or buying bonds, only those two things in public markets is considered alternative investments.
That makes sense. And for what's the trend of alts, I feel like over the last 2 years have become increasingly popular. Advisors,
because it worked.
Yeah. Because I was going to ask, with that, it works. How do returns look compared relative to an S&P 500? Certain alts, because I know it's a broad.
I mean, it's a massive universe. Yeah. So here's the difference. They don't always behave the same as those other types of investments, the more traditional investments. That's actually the benefit they bring to the table. The reason why you're hearing about them more in the last 2 years is because alternative investment strategies broadly did better than traditional markets. Even the ETF and mutual funds that are the least efficient way to gain access to this space broadly outperformed. So, the goal when you're investing, and I heard somebody say this once, and I thought this was brilliant, is that we talk about investing versus a benchmark, right? We never talk about it as like goals based, right? So you should be investing on a hurdle rate and not like, this is what the S&P returned. Like, this is what I'm saving for. This is what I'm using this money for. What is the rate of return I need to receive to be able to achieve X goal? What is the smoothest ride for me to get there, right? So I don't care if the S&P is up 30%. If that's gravy, right? If all you need is a 10% hurdle. So I like the idea of investing with a hurdle rate in mind and not focusing on a relative benchmark. I think that's brilliant. But the benefit of investing in alternatives is it smooths out the ride because they tend to behave differently than traditional markets. And there's a lot of reasons why, and probably not going to get into the weeds on that, but they can smooth out the ride. But also public markets tend to be more efficient, right? Because all the information's out there. And there's regulatory functions and companies have to report certain things. And so there is no information advantage necessarily in the public markets. I mean, there can be, but it's minor. And it really becomes just a difference of opinion at that point. In the private markets, there's a lot less efficiency because you don't have constant market action to provide you transparency on value. So it really does become more about skill, but it also gives you greater opportunity to do better than the public markets, right? Because you can have an information advantage. You can have, in the case of private equity, you can have just a scale advantage. Like if a company has a lot of money and is taking other companies private and then using resources that they have internally to make them better, more profitable companies, and then spinning them out and making money off that, that is the real opportunity. Venture capital is the same way. It's, trying to figure out who's going to be the next successful business and placing your bets like they're horses. And then you just get a feel sometimes for, who can be successful or not. And more times than not, most of what you bet on is not going to win. But you don't need that, because the people who win can, make up for everybody that lost. And for that reason, alternative investments can be extremely lucrative. But there's some limitations, like,
Liquidity
is the main one, right? So I actually think every single person should be comfortable putting 10% in something illiquid. I mean, if you have a CD, right, at the bank, you're somewhat illiquid, right? Because if you try to take it out early, you're going to have a penalty. You kind of have to approach private markets the same way. You might not have a willing buyer on the other side. It might take you a little bit of time. But more times than not, you'll be able to find somebody in a secondary if you really needed liquidity. But you're going to take a haircut on it, just like you would if you had a CD at the bank. But I think that every single person should feel comfortable putting 5 to 10% of their portfolio something illiquid. If the worst case scenario in the world happened, 90% of your portfolio is completely liquid and you could liquidate it, and you could have the time to liquidate the rest of it. So yeah, I think that there's benefits to doing that. You can invest more with things that you have passion for, and you can be more excited about what you're doing and how you are investing your money. And private markets, alternative investments really allow you to do that. So I think everybody should consider this. You get way more excited about it. But the opportunities for better returns than the traditional markets are substantial.
And with higher returns, is there also higher risk?
Absolutely. Illiquidity has risk, right? Because if you need the money, you can't get it. But there's alpha in illiquidity, and you have to think about that. In VC, there's more than half a chance that more than half your investments will go to zero. You don't need to have more than a couple go 100x on you, and then it doesn't matter. Yeah, there's absolutely risk, but anytime there's a potential for excess return. And anyone who tells you otherwise is lying, because even when we were doing like the AMC GameStop thing, right? Like, people thought this was easy. It wasn't, unless you were smart enough to know that this isn't an easy game. I made some money and I'm getting out. But the majority of people didn't think that, and then they ended up losing everything. It's never easy. There's always risk. And if it comes too easy, there's a reason. And you should remember that. But when it comes to private investments, alternative investments, not all of them are more risk, but they may not give you those extra returns. Private equity, private credit, venture capital, yes, they have more risk of things going to zero, but potential for excess returns, it's an asymmetrical return, and it really comes down to like making the right decisions, which is why I always recommend in those spaces that you work with somebody who does this professionally, who knows the markets. And that's why we started Banrion, is to be able to offer that. Everything has risk in life. You just got to position size your risk, right? Because we can't go through life in a bubble.
Yeah. And it's funny, that goes back to the start of the podcast, talking about risk and adversity and things that come with it. It's in investing, it's everything. I feel like I didn't realize how life goes up and down in spikes until getting into finance and seeing, COVID crash. You look back at 2001, 2008, all these periods it's like a metaphor for life too. Like, life will never be linear and just perfect.
No, life is, if you think you can go through life without ever struggling, you are going to be sadly mistaken. I love the markets for that very reason, though. It's like the least boring career you can possibly take, because it's never boring and you can always learn something. And the old guy who's been doing it for 1 million years is still going to have to learn something new, and something different is going to happen. And that may not even be like some crazy market thing, but it could just be like regulatory conditions change, or the Fed makes a different decision and it impacts things. But every single event is like a piece of information that you can use for future events.
Yeah, that was a helpful masterclass on alts and your business, and congratulations on the success that your business has had so far and continues.
So far, so good. We got a long way to go.
Yeah, momentum. It's 1% better daily. So in the conclusion of the podcast, I generally like to ask the guests, and it's fitting now because most people are graduating from college at this time, mid-May. What's through your whole life experience, and you've shared so much with us today, but what's your sort of 1-minute commencement speech if you were talking to kids graduating today?
Wow, that's a deep question. I would say that what you are about to embark on is not how your life will be defined, and that the number one thing you should focus on from this point forward is self-reflection and being comfortable with who you are and where you want to go, because that is going to be the key to your success and overcoming the inevitable adversity that will come your way at some point or another.
That is powerful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And do you think that the generation graduating today, are they more equipped for success with things like AI coming out and social? Is it going to be tougher?
I think they're better equipped for success of what is coming, but they will. I think that's true for every generation coming out of school. Think about like the generation in the 80s that were graduating and the first people with computer science degrees and things of that nature. Like my uncle, who just recently passed away a couple years ago, you know, he was in the military in the 60s and he was developing code. And so he was well ahead of his time and was built for success. Your success is contingent on your ability to persevere and your mental toughness more than anything else. You know, you'll always have some sort of advantage in terms of where we're going as a society and culturally and technologically than previous generations, but that doesn't mean that you'll be successful. You have to understand that you can still learn from the people who came before you, and that, again, it all really comes down to your own ability to be humble, to work hard, and to self-reflect and be constantly in a state of personal improvement, self-improvement. And if you can't do that, you probably won't be successful in life, because you'll think you're better than everybody else. You will never be as confident and comfortable in yourself, and you'll never be your authentic self to be successful. And then when you do hit that inevitable adversity, because you will, everybody does, it will be a lot harder for you to get yourself back up and back on track.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's extremely powerful. And where can the audience, I'll put all the description below, but where can they find you, your business, RIAs that are interested?
We have a website, banrioncapital.com. I have a personal website, shanasissel.com. I'm on Insta. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok. I'm everywhere. I'm sure you'll put all the handles in the show description, so I won't bore you all with just like rattling them off. I wish they were all the same, but they're not. But yeah, you can find me. I'm pretty much everywhere. So, connect with me. If this resonates with you and you have questions or you just want to get my opinion on things, I'm always here. I'm always happy to do that.
Thank you, Shana. That is Shana Sissel. Really appreciate your time today. This was a powerful podcast. Not only a master class on finance, but a master class on life, marriage, money, everything that comes in between, and the reality of life. That was really powerful. I learned so much personally. So if you guys enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and continue to support the podcast so we can continue to bring on amazing people like Shana. I'm so excited to see what you guys do at Banrion next. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.